the Arctic campaign started back in 2010, and basically, the situation was that the Arctic was just, as far as the oil companies were concerned, even governments for that matter, the Arctic was just a wasteland. I mean, it was a frozen sea. No development was possible. Nobody really cared about it. In fact, the only thing that went on in the Arctic was that Russia and the United States used to send their nuclear submarines underneath the ice cap. But one of the things about them doing that was they had a lot of data on how thick the ice was, which came to be very useful later for scientists. But back in 2010, as the Arctic was beginning to melt and was beginning to retreat, the oil companies suddenly got interested, thinking, well, there's a lot of fossil fuels under there, we can start exploiting it. And governments, and particularly Russia, Canada, the United States, thinking, this territory is now becoming quite important, and they started putting in territorial claims. And the first Western oil company to go up there was Cairn Energy, which was a little-known Scottish oil company that decided to start exploring for oil up there. And that was the first action that we did, was up in Greenland. And it was basically opening a new front in the Arctic to prevent the expansion of oil and gas companies into new frontiers. And we did it in other places around the world as well, but the Arctic was probably the biggest. Now, a few years later, we also took on Russia, that was also wanting not just to claim territory in the Arctic, but was also wanting to explore for oil in the Arctic. And we occupied one of their oil rigs. It was the second time we occupied it. And the Russian government took exception to this and seized our ship. They seized all the crew on board illegally because it was in international waters, the seizure of the ship and its crew. And they were imprisoned in Russia. And so there was a huge campaign to get them released. And the thing is about the crew was that they were from all over the world. And some of them were from the West, including from the UK, but some of them were from friendly countries to Russia.
All Greenpeace people, all your people? They
were all Greenpeace people, but some of them, it created a bit of a headache for Russia because it was a global crew, and therefore there were a lot of countries involved. Now, of course, the thing about how to deal with a situation like that was that the Foreign Office said, keep quiet, and we'll do this through diplomatic means. Now, we thought keeping quiet and doing this through diplomatic means is not going to work. The only thing that's going to work is if we make more noise than has ever been made before to get them the release. So we ran a massive global campaign, putting huge pressure every way we could on the Russian regime to get them released. And we knew the Sochi Winter Olympics were coming up. This was at the end of the year. Sochi Olympics were at the beginning of the new year. And we knew that Putin had a number of problems on his hand. It wasn't just the Arctic 30. He also had Pussy Riot in prison, and he also had one of the Russian oligarchs called Ovsky was also in prison that was causing him problems. And so we played on the fact that if this went through to the Winter Olympics, this would be a PR disaster for him. And we had planned to run a campaign at the Winter Olympics. In fact, we designed campaign material of using the rings of the Olympics, which were like handcuffs. And so we were quite prepared, if this was going to go on, that we were going to continue with the campaign. But the pressure was quite relentless, and a lot of people came out in support of the campaign, not just celebrities, but also privately. A lot of people who had been foreign secretaries, secretaries of state, ambassadors, other people who knew people in Russia. Sir Paul McCartney wrote to him personally because he'd played in Red Square. Wow. Putin apparently learned English from Beatles lyrics. Wow. And then there were other people. There were some actors that Putin knew personally, been on holiday with even. They also contacted him. So, there was a lot of work done, both publicly and privately, to put pressure on him to get them out. And eventually, they were all released.
And what was your personal role in making all this happen? I've heard rumours of a meeting in a bar with an FSB officer.
Well, I met with Boris Yeltsin, who was, you know, the previous president of Russia before Putin. I met with his chief of staff at the Goring Hotel next to Buckingham Palace. Yeah, he was high up in the intelligence services, very closely connected. I drank far too much vodka with him till the early hours of the morning, just trying to get insight contacts, asking him how he could put pressure inside the system. There were many things went on like that, because you have to remember also there were Russian oligarchs that owned Arsenal and Chelsea Football Club. Putin's bankers were in London. There were lots of people that we contacted. Even the governor of the region where they were being held, his son was a hedge fund manager in Berkeley Square in London. I mean, we just mapped where everybody was. We just went and knocked on a lot of doors. You see a similar thing happening now with the invasion of the Ukraine, where, you know, there are some oligarchs like Abramovich and so on are also playing a similar kind of diplomatic role, trying to get Putin to see some sense. I mean, look, it's a whole different situation, you know, with regard to the invasion of Ukraine, because, you know, Putin sees himself as a modern Tsar. He wants to recreate the Russian Empire. So I think this is a much more complex and difficult situation, you know, by a million times.